Have you ever imagined a world, well, fill in the blank. SparkHub is about making dreams happen when life throws major curveballs at you. It's my hope that any time you listen to an episode, something will spark inside of you, and even if no one listens, but I leave some kind of legacy time capsule behind for my children that may even spark them to imagine their own great world after I'm gone, well, that's good enough for me. Below each episode are crucial show notes, and please support us by visiting thesparkhub.com. Now, let's begin. My name is Alan, and I have a heck of a story for you. Some of you may have heard a solo episode I created around navigating a do-it-yourself divorce, so in short, a survey of one. But over what now turned out to be 3 episodes, I had a conversation to seek a female point of view on the topic from my long-term friend, Syreeta Fonso. Now, Syreeta and I have been friends for over 30 years, first meeting and working together in Australia a very long time ago. And we've been friends for so long because we have a lot in common, and we sometimes seem to be leading parallel lives. Both of us ended up leaving our native countries to seek adventure in the United Kingdom, high-flying careers in London. We both got married, we both had 2 kids of similar age, and as it turns out, personality traits, and we're both divorced. So throughout my divorce, Syreeta's been a pillar of support for me. She's given me a lot of perspective and empathy, and we've probably shared hundreds of hours of voice notes, helping each other look at things from different perspectives. We decided our conversations might actually help others, so we recorded the conversation you're about to listen to, but I split it into 3 angles, which I explored before. So divorce with kids, but through 3 lenses: an emotional lens, a financial lens, and a legal lens. So full caveat, whatever your situation, please always seek legal and financial advice if you're about to go through or are going through a divorce. What follows is only a conversation intended to spark some consideration or some thoughts based on our experiences and things we kind of wish we knew at the time. Welcome to part 3 of 3, which is the legal lens. Okay, so we've talked about the emotional side of divorce. We've talked about financials, how that works. And so finally you come to the final step in a divorce, which is a contract. In different countries it's called different things. In the UK it's called a financial remedy order or simply a financial order, depending on who you speak to. And it's a binding contract where once you've established your financial setup, you then agree in writing before the family court as a stick to hit anyone who colors outside the lines. You agree to your final legal settlement, what is expected of both parties for, I guess, a limited term, until the kids are 18. And my understanding of the legal process, well, before I get to that, there's a story I want to tell, which is, 2 stories. One of them is my uncle, who's a historian, British history, used to tell me about what happened in the 90s when there was a war in Yugoslavia. And Western troops would go there, and because Yugoslavia is more or less it was the Slavic Baltic states and Yugoslavia included. It was a fairly Western-looking society. The buildings looked the same as Western Europe, malls, shops, grocery stores. But the soldiers would go into that environment that would be familiar to them and find horrific crimes, bodies, parts and stuff. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because what they discovered is if they took those soldiers from that war zone and took them home right away, they didn't have time to decompress. And Damian Lewis, who's an actor, has said that when he used to go from hero to zero, which is something I've said before and I'll come to in a minute, but for a man, from a man's perspective, he used to go from Hollywood glitz and glamour and sets where he was treated like royalty to screaming kids and a wife who was desperate for his time. And there was nothing in between, just like those soldiers that used to go from the east to the west. What they did for the soldiers was they mandated a rest period where they would sail to Cyprus and spend a month and just decompress and do therapy and exercise before they went back to regular civil society. So hopefully they would minimize the damage that they had incurred when they walked back into a mall and didn't have flashbacks of certain horrific scenes. And Damian Lewis said the same thing. He said he had to, in his marriage and with his children, had to invent a decompression process where he went from Hollywood to normal domestic life, but he had to sort of step down over time. The reason I tell those stories is because as I look back, and we talked about it in an earlier episode, I never had that time and I think you didn't as well, to decompress. And again, this used to tick off my ex, and I didn't mean it to, but at the time I used to say, I feel like I'm a hero when I'm out in the field, because I'm convincing people to part with money, and I'm getting contracts signed, and I'm being successful. I'm bringing money home to pay for a wonderful lifestyle. But the minute I walk in the door, I felt like I was a zero. I just was shouted at, and again, that's not to blame anyone. It's just, if the shoe were on the other foot, I'd probably do the same thing. So I think why I bring all this up is because when you're in a marriage, there's the emotional side, there's the financial side, which again, how do you figure out value? What is the value of everything? The value of your time as a mother, the value of my time building a bank account, whatever that is. You then have to come to this third area that is often not benefiting from decompression, which is legal structure. Now this is where finances I'm good with, emotions I wasn't good with, and I'm speaking for myself only. But the legal process is the legal process. It's very binary. And the risk when you get into it is, as you discovered, there's different terms that mean different things. There's different clauses that mean different triggers. And there's all this whole landscape to navigate after you've come through emotion and after you've come through finance. You got to write it all down in a binding way. And it has to become your source of truth for you and the children. And I found that difficult because, as clear as the standard is to me, and I can only speak for the UK system, it protects the children. It is called a family court. It actually does not care about the lifestyle of either parent or either spouse. It cares that there is provision for the children, and it is weaponized in a way that, well, I understand this. Someone said to me, men will weaponize money and women will weaponize children. And I don't say that lightly. And certainly I think it's different in every case, but generally that's what the court is there to protect against. So now we enter the third episode, which is how did Syreeta, in her own way, and me in my own way, navigate the legal creation of a binding order, because I felt certainly that it was a very onerous process, and you have to think long and hard about all your decisions to make sure your children aren't affected, which is not easy. But women first, what was it like once you got through the financial stuff? What was the legal process like for you?
Well, I think I would almost say that one tracked the other. So, for instance, even to the point where, in my mind, once we had decided to separate and go our separate ways, I thought, well, there's a divorce petition, there's an applicant, and there's a respondent for the divorce. We know we're going our separate ways, so let's get the paper done. And I was advised under no uncertain terms that you must not get divorced, do not get a decree nisi.
That's the document that nullifies the marriage certificate.
Exactly. Do not get that until you have a financial remedy order. The financial remedy order is absolutely 100% the more important document, because that is the blueprint. That is your blueprint for how your assets will fall and what will guide what you can and can't do lifestyle-wise in the future until the kids are adults. So I suppose from that point of view, it was excruciating from an emotional point of view, understanding that, okay, we actually are waiting to get divorced. We're waiting until we have a decision on the fight over money, until we can actually technically say we're two different legal entities. So that was difficult. But I think once I understood the implications of that process, it became easier. I think the legal process I found tricky because I am quite emotionally driven. And I think I found it difficult that my lawyer, who was excellent, wasn't able to see the emotional side of things. And to her credit, that's absolutely not her job. Her job is to make sure that she gives me the best possible advice, legal advice. But I think what was really apparent to me very early on is that there is an emotional cost to many legal decisions that you make, especially those with a timeline attached, an onerous timeline attached to them. And At some point, it becomes about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and deal with things and move on or not move on. And things take so long that you do get to a point where you have to say, I have to attach a value to my sanity.
And your time.
And my time.
Yeah.
Yeah, time and sanity. You know, you get to the point where you just want to pull the ripcord. And it is really, it's a game of chess, and I don't want anyone to go through this. I mean, it's been going on for obviously years and years and years. But
I'll tell you what I noticed on the back of everything you said is that the only reference I had for the legal system, the family court system, the standard of the court I was expected to meet, or we were expected to meet, was other couples that have divorced, and every scenario is different. And I saw couples blowing stupid amounts of money over a car or over maybe an heirloom inheritance, and it just seemed to me everyone's different, but it seemed people were going to war and trying to write a contract, a binding contract for stuff that they may or may not need, or maybe that wasn't valuable for the kids. So I had lots of, I suppose, case studies around me, and I kind of looked at that and said, I have to put a value on my time, and you also have to say there will be a point where it's going to be tough, but then you're on your own after that, and you got to rebuild yourself. And so where I'm going with this is that I struggled myself during the legal process to go, okay, well, what are the risks? And now if I apply my knowledge from the business world, I write term sheets, I write contracts, I write freelancer agreements. I've seen millions of templates, but once they're written and they're signed, the only time you look at them is if something goes wrong.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And that's how I felt about writing a contract with my ex-wife, is this is going to be our source of truth. But you know what? Can we color outside the lines? Would I, for my children, color outside the lines? Yeah, of course I would. The only worry I have is if you make an agreement, but then you color outside the lines, it gets into favors again. So now you're suddenly dealing with, who am I dealing with? Am I dealing with a friend? Am I dealing with a foe? Am I dealing with, but at the end of the day, it's, for me, the family court standard was fair and equitable split of assets, of non-risky assets, and also what's the provision for the children. You know, I've seen people try to game the system with things like custody. So I think if you have 50-50, no one owes anyone, but then one of the parties earns less, one of the parties has to give up work, and it can get messy, right? Depending on every situation. But from my perspective, the hardest part, aside from the emotional side, was a misunderstanding over finances, or trying to come to a common understanding of numbers, and then locking that in. And then, you know what? Our divorce was finalized about 6-7 months ago. And in that 6-7 months, tons of things have changed. Around us is the world, the economy, politics, money, mortgages. And so as good as that contract is, how enforceable is it, is my question. And I don't mean that from a nasty strategic point of view. I'm thinking of the kids, and I'm thinking of, like, what if we disagree on something? Like I said, in my operational life, suddenly everyone's looking at the contract. Okay, that's what's written, but what's reality? And then you suddenly, what's your framework? What's your fallback? And so you still have to play chess even after that document's signed.
Yeah, absolutely.
You still have to play chess.
It's not even, you know, what if we disagree on something, or what will the market allow us to do?
Yeah.
What are the realities of what we're dealing with outside of this paper now? If the market, whether it's the job market, the real estate market, the financial market, even the emotional landscape that exists within families, if those aspects of life do not allow us to execute the financial order in the way that has been ordained, in the way that we agreed, you know, we have to be able to pivot. Can we pivot? As you said, are we friends or are we enemies? What's our level of common understanding? It's a hard situation to be in, because it requires a huge degree of emotional intelligence, maturity, all of those things that we all should have. But at the point of divorce, we're often so hampered and blinkered that it can be difficult to see straight. It can be difficult to kind of feel like you have aligned goals outside of yourself, because you're mourning a loss. You're grieving. It's a grieving process of grieving a life that you thought you were going to have forever and a day.
Yeah.
And we don't often talk about that aspect. We talk fundamentals when it comes to divorce and the legal process and the financials and all of the kind of admin stuff that needs to be done around divorce. It's very rare that we give ourselves grace for being in a wholly soul-destroying situation, because that's what divorce is at the end of the day. It's one of the most stressful things you can go through in your life.
It clips your wings.
It clips your wings, and at the same time, if you've got children involved, you've still got to be their soldier. And so I think to make life-critical decisions, legal and financial and emotional, under those circumstances, it's like going to war.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because when you go to war, you do war scenarios, right? And I think I'd love to hear your experience, but in my experience, I went, okay, emotionally, I'm still messed up. I'm trying to make sure the kids are okay. I'm even trying to make sure my ex is okay. I still have an instinct to protect my family, whatever shape that's in. Then the finances are the finances, and I'm trying to be creative to make sure that we can not default on taxes or mortgages or whatever, to protect, again, the family. But then in all of that, you're looking at legal war games. And I think what I discovered is you more or less have three routes in your decision. You either try to figure it out between yourselves amicably. You go to mediation. And by the way, each of these has a cost. So the only cost to you doing DIY is time and emotional drain, I guess. If you go to mediation, there's a cost, but it's supposed to facilitate, and it circles back to something you said about therapy. There's a third person in the room who can be objective and say, actually, what he or she is trying to say is this, and frame it differently. So it takes the venom out, in theory. And 99% of couples I know of divorced have done mediation. And then the third option is you clearly aren't speaking the same language, so you have to pay someone to advocate. And that is a very costly exercise. And you made an earlier point about you have to calculate that. So those are the war games in the family court. And as a comedian once said, you're almost preparing for a court date you're never going to attend, or 99% of the time you won't attend, because most things are settled out of court. Very rarely, in my understanding, do divorced couples end up in front of a judge or a magistrate. And even those that do, the magistrate just dictates the terms and says, stop.
We ended up in front of a magistrate twice.
Twice.
Twice. Yeah.
What were the circumstances that led to that? Was it a misunderstanding or?
Well, no. I mean, the second one was a misunderstanding. Either it was a misunderstanding or just dogma. But I think what it was actually, this is interesting because we talk about colouring outside the lines of the financial order. I think life circumstances meant that we needed to colour outside of the lines of our financial order. However, I think there was a misunderstanding as to the complicity of doing that. So I was okay to do that. My ex wasn't, but didn't verbally communicate it until it came time to petition me to go to court, if that makes sense.
It does, but if I'm hearing you correctly, even though you had financial contract in place, there are still misunderstandings that can happen that will require the intervention of a magistrate. I was several steps removed from that, and I have seen some nasty situations where people have had to go before judges. One in particular was a woman who was expecting more from the divorce, or had calculated she could get more, and the judge said, you have to cut your cloth differently because your man is not a meal ticket anymore, as long as he pays his child support. It's not the purview of the court to advise on your lifestyle. And again, that was one story I heard. I've heard many others, but it's just never ending if you end up in front of a magistrate, and it can, as you say, it can drag on.
If you've got kids, it's never ending. If you haven't got kids, it's a lot more straightforward. And the interesting thing is that having kids is also, it's not just significant because it's about their provision. It's significant from a woman's perspective because of the time she likely has had to take out of the workforce. It's sort of the lost income through the years of caring for children, which is essentially an unpaid job, but it's also the attrition of skill set and value when it comes to kind of getting back into the workforce.
And skills fade.
Yeah, skills
There's
fade.
one thing I learned which I found difficult, and I say this on behalf of a woman or a mother, and I only learned this because, again, I had to speak to different people who were going through it. But the court system in the UK and the Western world is built on something called precedent. So basically, whenever a case is brought before a judge, they have to refer to old cases and old records to see how it was resolved, and as much as possible try and reheat and reuse it. Whereas in the French system, it's civil code. It's written, it's dogmatic. Or in the Swedish case, it's 50-50, shut up, get out the court. But in the UK, there's room for nuance. Why I bring that up is because what can be brought before a court is a woman's earnings before she had children. And I know this happened to you as well, but it happened to a friend of mine where they said, well, you used to earn this much 10, 15 years ago. Precedent says you can earn it again. Stop chasing the man for money, go find, recapitalize and earn that salary again. And this happened to a friend of mine, and I believe it happened to you as well. But I'm sitting there going, wow, it doesn't take into account economic change. It doesn't take into account pandemics. It doesn't take into account neurodiverse children. It doesn't take into account...
Doesn't take into account children full stop. So
No.
it assumes that you still are working from the same jumping off platform as you were 10 years ago when you may have been earning 80k or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you
and
can
that, and that
just
happened
click
to
your
you
fingers
as
and do
well,
it.
didn't it?
It did happen to me. It did happen
Was
to
it
me.
a shock to you to be told? That
It was a shock to me. I had been told that it would be likely, so it wasn't as big a shock as I thought it would be. My lawyer told me that your likely response will be no when you ask for spousal support, even if you ask for a nominal spousal support, because what often happens is women can request a nominal fee, monthly fee for spousal support to keep the door open so that it can kick in should she lose her income. And that's what I was pushing for, basically, like a £1 a month spousal support payment.
But it was in anticipation of...
But it was in anticipation of, should I then not be able to find work, I can then ignite the application for spousal and say, actually, my contract is finished. I've been unable to secure anything more. I'm now incomeless, and so I now wish to ignite the spousal. The door's open because you've been paying £1 a month for the last 18 months or whatever. So that was denied to me based on what you've just been talking about, my potential earnings in quotation marks.
But that was pegged to a former life. That's the issue.
It's pegged to a former life, yeah. It's pegged to historically, what have you shown that you can generate?
So you're profiled, it's horrible.
Yeah, you're profiled, but you're profiled in isolation of every other life circumstance that has changed since you've actually taken the dip in income.
Well, Syreeta, that's been... I know we're going deep now on specific legal stuff, but if we zoom back out, you and I have now spoken for quite a length of time across emotional, financial, and legal aspects of divorce, which we've had to go through. And I hope whoever's listening is benefiting from it. But I suppose, big picture, now looking back through the whole quagmire that you've been through and continue to go through, and I do as well, if you could jump in a time machine and go back and tell yourself one thing about what it would be like, what would you say? And would you fight for the marriage in any different way, knowing what you know now?
I suppose in terms of lessons to myself.
Well, expectation versus reality, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, expectation versus reality is an interesting one. I would say my expectation, frankly, would be that things would continue to be pretty similar to what they were when I was married, but I wouldn't be married. And now I know what a fallacy that is. I understand now that what happens is you break apart a family and everything shrinks on either side of the equation. So it's not a case of you have 50% on one side, 50% on the other, or 70 on one side, 30% on the other. The whole never equates to 100% anymore.
It's a zero-sum game?
Yeah, I would say it's a zero-sum game, the actual financials of divorce. And it really is a case of cutting your cloth to match what you're dealing with. I would tell myself to be more financially astute from the beginning. I would tell myself that time is money, and I would have done more with my time at home to position myself for difficult financial times when and if they come. Because now I'm more acutely aware than ever now that time equals money. I am very judicious with my time now, and I try to treat it as money. I try to ask myself now, how much is your time worth per hour? And how do you want to spend it? And it's not just the monetary value, it's also the I guess
would you have fought for the marriage any differently, or do you feel it was doomed when it was doomed?
I wouldn't have fought for the marriage any differently. I can tell you that now. I think I fought valiantly in every possible way I could.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have fought for the marriage differently. I would have shown a lot more interest in the business side of things, because I think that would have been beneficial to both of us, not just for my own knowledge, in order not to feel like a turkey when it all blew up,
Yeah.
but also just as a bonding mechanism. I feel that we could have weathered the storm better had there have been more of a side-by-side approach to the business side of marriage.
Yeah.
And I think I was very sort of romantically driven, and that doesn't necessarily weather you through the storms of life. So I think that's what I would have done differently, is I would have taken a much deeper interest in the business side of marriage.
Yeah.
Because I think it would have been appreciated by my ex as well. And at the same time, I think I would have also worked harder to communicate to him that the child rearing is a job with a value attached. I don't think I worked hard enough to communicate that. And as I said earlier, I really do believe that if somebody doesn't understand what I'm saying, it's on me. So I think that's absolutely where I would focus differently next time.
Interesting.
And I say next time because I still believe in marriage.
After
Crazy. After all that, glutton for punishment.
Well, I heard an expression: the first is the worst, and the next is the best. I don't know if that's
Convenient.
Yeah.
After all is said and done, is there anything that you would do differently if you had your time again, Alan?
100,000 different things, but I think to aggregate them, I just feel that there was too many points of disconnection. And even if I maybe should have left more notes, or just even in the face of negativity towards me, or I think I should have depersonalized it more. I remember when I worked in the police, I was taught people will attack you, but they're attacking the uniform, because that uniform might have taken someone's parent away. So now, when you're a father and a businessman and a husband, you're wearing all these different uniforms. And I think my issue was I was wearing the wrong uniform in the wrong situation. I was taking things too literally. And I just wish I could have represented even the decisions I made around business to say, this is for you. This is for the family. It's not about me. It's about the family. But I think I took too much for granted. I assumed it was obvious. And I think that's the biggest breaker up of marriage on both sides, is you assume too much, and you assume things are obvious when they're not. And sometimes you have to restate. And I'll come back to my example about the airplane. You have to keep realigning the destination. But I also feel there's a lot worse circumstances that we're going through as a modern society, as parents of potentially children with neurodiversity. There's social media, there's TV. I mean, just take marriage out the equation and life partnership and love out of the equation. Because let's face it, I did go on a big global quest to find the one. And that might have added some artificial pressure. But at the end of the day, I just think the world is changing so fast, and I'm just trying to keep up. But if you don't keep up with someone next to you, you will end up with so many points of disconnection, and you'll end up contemptuous, and then you'll fall into everything we discussed: emotional, financial, legal processes that break you up. I concur that I'd like to believe there's another marriage or another partnership. I'm certainly a lot savvier now. And I do feel that if I knew what I knew back then, I would have done things way differently. But of course, you can't go back. You can only go forward. But I appreciate you coming on the podcast. SparkHub is, I guess, my effort to figure all this out with good friends.
And thanks for having me. I really enjoyed our chat.
Here's to more.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening. To support SparkHub, please have a look at the show notes below this episode or visit thesparkhub.com to sign up for our newsletter, which offers exclusive inside scoops. Just quickly, the music you're hearing is composed by Shi Haoyan Shi, and the audio engineering is done by Emily Chung. My name is Alan, and I hope that you dream big and something sparked in you today.